This week, yet another record-breaking night of Russian drone attacks launched against Ukraine. We had President Trump accusing Vladimir Putin of serving up some BS. And after lifting a pause on weapons deliveries, the US reportedly promised to send Patriot missiles to bolster Kyiv's defences. As always, our team is here to answer your questions on all of those issues and many more.
I'm Vitaly Shevchenko.
I'm James Waterhouse.
And I'm Lucy Hockings. This is Ukrainecast.
Ukrainecast from BBC News.
Just a sense this week that Donald Trump's rhetoric has really changed on Ukraine. Just what he was saying about President Putin in the White House serving up some BS. But the big question that lots of people are asking, is this actually going to change President Trump's approach to dealing with the war? So let's get straight to our first question.
Hello Ukrainecast, this is Mark in The Hague. I would like to ask when you think that Donald Trump or JD Vance will visit Ukraine. Thank you.
Any chance of that, James?
Well, I wasn't exactly preparing for a White House visit in Kyiv the last time I was there. I think if you look at over the past few months since Trump retook office, he has sent, who is now quite a peripheral envoy, Keith Kellogg, this retired general, to the frustration of ministers in Kyiv who think they're not being taken seriously enough. Conversely, we've seen Steve Witkoff, Trump's more senior envoy, who is negotiating some pretty serious conflicts at the moment, eagerly returning each time to Moscow, where he's had repeated face-to-face meetings with Vladimir Putin. You've seen JD Vance say he wouldn't go anywhere near a war zone to Zelensky after that bust up in the Oval Office. And I think if you look in the main at how this Trump administration is addressing Russia's invasion of Ukraine, yes, it's saying we don't want to take sides, we want to broker a peace deal, but that strategy has clearly involved a closer alignment with Moscow rather than Kyiv.
Yeah, but Vitaly, what did you make of that change in tone from President Trump this week? It was quite extraordinary.
It was, but more words.
Frustrated. He was frustrated, though, clearly, with President Putin.
He has been giving Vladimir Putin the benefit of the doubt for so long, 2 weeks, and then he kept saying, Vladimir Putin clearly wants to end this war, but what's stopping him?
Let's look at what's happening on Capitol Hill, not just with President Trump, because there is a sense that there might be some momentum there, particularly when it comes to sanctions. Nick from Surrey has got in touch with us, and he says, I seem to remember hearing that the US Congress had been preparing a bill to introduce third-party sanctions on countries dealing in Russian oil. Am I correct in this end? And if so, what is the latest position? Will such sanctions ever be introduced? Where are we at with sanctions, James?
Well, President Zelensky would like to know. He has constantly called for sterner sanctions on Russia to try and strangle its war machine in some way, because his argument is, to this point, it hasn't been sufficient. Russia is able to keep manufacturing tanks, weaponry, ammunition, and mobilising men, and offering contracts by doing so. Lindsey Graham is this experienced Republican senator, and he represented a growing pocket of the Republican Party, where there was also growing scepticism over Ukraine's ability to win this war. He drafted this bill, which in short would see 500% tariffs slapped on countries that bought Russian gas and Russian uranium, in the idea being to put them off, essentially. Trump publicly had said, look, they cost a lot, sanctions, I don't think it would be helpful. He's clearly reluctant to use such a stick with the Kremlin. But it seems, according to Lindsey Graham, the president is now on board. But in broad strokes, it involves the president having the power to waiver such a measure. So if he's thinking, if Congress say, right, let's do it, let's slap 500% tariff on India, one of Russia's biggest energy customers, the president could say, let's not this time. So there is still a caveat there, and I think until we see these concrete measures being taken by America, we should see it as continued posturing.
So, and to be clear, Vitaly, if this happens, that would really water down the power of the bill and these sanctions?
Well, essentially, it would give Donald Trump the option of not imposing those sanctions. And if we look at the countries who have been buying Russian oil and gas in huge volumes, giving Russia money, which is then channeled into the war machine, countries like China and India, will Donald Trump impose huge sanctions, huge tariffs, 500% on China and India because of Ukraine? That will have an immense impact on global trade. Catastrophic impact, some would say. So I've been skeptical about the sanctions that have been imposed so far, the way they've been enforced, and this idea, I remain to be convinced as to how it's going to work, frankly.
And does that mean in Moscow they're not really that worried?
Not at all. Listening to what Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, has been saying, and the Russian deputy foreign minister this morning, they're saying sanctions. They're just shrugging their shoulders. They're not going to have a profound impact on what we're doing. That's what Mr. Ryabkov said in Moscow. So they think they've found a way of circumventing the sanctions that have been imposed so far, and they think they'll be able to deal with whatever Donald Trump is willing to impose on them.
And yet this is something Zelensky is pretty much calling for every day, James.
All the time. But what is interesting, I mean, I'm really trying to... I've got a self-imposed Trump rule where it can change week by week. So as of today, he is seemingly frustrated with Russia and he is threatening further measures. But we have said this time and time again. The question is whether that lack of progress with Putin, the Kremlin saying sanctions won't affect us, Trump getting nothing out of his official conversations with Putin, the continued aerial bombardments where we are seeing...
Which can happen hours after a conversation.
Hours after a conversation. Will those collectively fuel Donald Trump finally to pivot, to alter his stance and to align with Ukraine on a firmer level? I still can't see it.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to move on now to a topic. It's actually something we don't usually cover, but quite a few of you have been getting in contact with us with several questions around Transnistria. Let me read out a few examples. Hi, everyone at Ukrainecast. This is from Adam in Melbourne. I'm curious about Transnistria and I'm hoping you can give some details about it, as I think it's intertwined with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And Conrad here in London says, after Russia failed to take Kyiv, one of its key strategic goals seemed to be securing a land corridor through Odessa to Transnistria, threatening another fragile democracy and testing NATO's resolve on its border. Yet we hear little now about what Conrad is calling a frozen conflict. Vitaly, before we get to Russia's goals, I think we need a little bit of a reminder about Transnistria, starting with where is it?
Transnistria, otherwise known as the Dniester region, is basically a slither of land sandwiched between Moldova and Ukraine. Not too populated, about 500,000 people there, but it can be argued that Transnistria lies at the beginning of what's happening right now. Moldova, specifically the breakaway region of Transnistria, is one of the earliest examples of Russia deploying troops and supporting separatism to stop former Soviet republics from escaping its orbit. Transnistria is the base of what was the 14th army, Russian army, and they're guarding weapons, munitions depots there. And those troops have been involved in battling Moldovan troops. It's not happening right now, but it's a reminder of what Russia did in the past and what it started doing in Georgia and Ukraine later. Right now, those troops have been depleted, Russian troops.
How many troops are we talking about?
We don't really know, but President Zelensky says levels have gone down to about 1,000, 1,500. So
and how many people live in Transnistria?
500,000. Yeah, about 500,000. And those Russian troops, they don't seem to be actively involved in Russia's war effort against Ukraine, i.e. I've not seen reports of them somehow trying to infiltrate Ukraine's bordering Odessa region. but it's clearly an asset that Russia will be keen to use, maybe is thinking of using. It's there.
Have you been there, James?
I have not, no. I mean, colleagues have. It's a unsurprisingly difficult place to get to.
But when the war kicked off, Ukraine shut the border straight away.
Yes, but to get across, it's across the river, isn't it? But if you look at it as a map, imagine you've got Transnistria to the west of Ukraine, and then you've got Russia's advance in that early invasion where they came up through Crimea and they took the southern sort of coast of Ukraine. The goal for Moscow was to connect the two. So you've got Transnistria connected to this belt of Ukrainian territory all the way to Russia itself, and it's because of the defence Ukraine put up, notably in the Kherson region, that Russia couldn't really get beyond the southern city of Kherson. That was ultimately liberated later that year.
So strategically important.
Absolutely, for Russia.
Absolutely.
Control the coastline.
Indeed. I'm really pleased to say we have a listener joining us on the line. Hi, Heidi.
Hello.
Hi, Heidi.
Hey,
Heidi, you've just been on holiday. You're looking all glowing and tanned and bronze. Where have you been?
I've just come back from Turkey.
And how was that?
It was lovely. I'm surprised to see there were so many Russian families staying. It was predominantly Russian families at the hotel.
But this experience, to the question that you have for us today.
Yes. So while I was laying in the pool, it just got me thinking about Russia's relationship with the rest of the world, and in particular Turkey. I know they're a member of NATO, but I also know that they've bought Russian military equipment in the past, and I wondered how this sits.
Turkey's relationship in all of this?
I mean, Turkey are just, they have straddled both being a NATO member and retaining ties with Russia on an extraordinary level. And you're right, Heidi, they are a big energy customer of Russia. They have huge tourism ties, cooperation, where Russians, as you've seen, travel there to get a bit of sun further south. And yet, President Erdogan has long said Crimea is Ukrainian. He has armed Ukraine in the past, and he's used this kind of straddling to present Turkey, along with several Middle Eastern countries, as a potential venue, as a potential broker for an eventual a peace negotiation, should that ever materialise. So Turkey is a fascinating one in that they have retained their relationship with Moscow, but try to support Ukraine.
And Vitaly, I remember well you standing there outside the negotiations, joining us for Ukrainecast, but also on BBC News as well. I mean, what was your sense of Turkey's relationship in all of this and where they see themselves going forward?
well, tourism, it plays a huge part in the Turkish economy. And if that's what your livelihood depends on, are you going to just start refusing to serve Russians or give them accommodation?
And it's not just where Heidi was. There are lots and lots of Russian tourists right across Turkey,
Well,
on the coast.
Yeah, I was in Antalya last summer as well. Yeah, lots of Russians there. Shop signs in Russian. I drove through Europe 2 weeks ago. Berlin, for example, lots of Russian signs. Tourist buses advertise their services in Russian. Unlike Turkey, where Russians don't need visas, they do need visas to come to Berlin. There's lots of them there. And there are, demand, make sure that there's supply of those services. So there's governments and their politics and their attitudes, but there's also the services sector, which is perfectly willing to provide their services to Russian visitors.
Heidi, you sent us a pretty crazy picture, which we've all enjoyed looking at. It's an inflatable tank, but it's being used for the kids in the pool as a kind of thing to float around on.
Yes.
What did you think when you saw that?
Well, I was quite surprised. It was parked opposite me, and I was quite surprised. It also had quite a high velocity water cannon. I didn't know whether to pop it or have a go in it, to be honest.
Did you speak to Turks when you were there, Vitaly? I mean, what is their view of the conflict?
I did, and I hate to use the phrase, but quote-unquote ordinary people, they just want it to be over. They don't necessarily take sides, but most of the people I spoke to in Turkey and in Germany and then in Poland as well, they seemed to be desperate for this just to be over and for normality to resume. And by that I mean normal trade, normal tourism, normal relations, as opposed to, well, look at us here talking about guns and weapons and missiles. That shouldn't be normal. That's the attitude I got.
Of course, there's an irony never lost on Ukrainians of countries and people further afield talking about a tiredness with a war they're not fighting.
Yeah, I can imagine. Heidi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Pleased you had a nice holiday.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi.
Let's have another question now, and this time it's from a listener in the US.
Hello, this is Beth Ann from Southeast Arizona, USA. I've just been reading about political infighting among the Ukrainian officials, with different aides feuding with each other. There was some mention of a 3-year feud, but I don't know what that is about. Can you enlighten me, please?
Okay, there's infighting. Of course there is.
There is everywhere.
It's everywhere. Well, there's politics. It's part of it. In Ukraine, it's not crippling, and it's happening within this bracket of fighting Russia, and whoever's involved in infighting, they support the idea of resisting the Russian invasion. In other words, the whatever pro-Russian parties Ukraine had in the past, before the full-scale invasion, before the start of the invasion in 2014, they don't form a part of the mainstream anymore. However, there's a lot of criticism of Volodymyr Zelensky and his rule and his associates. One thing we shouldn't really say is that Ukraine is uniformly supportive of Volodymyr Zelensky and his Servant of the People party. His biggest potential rival is out of the equation. Valery Zaluzhny, the former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian army, is now ambassador in London, Ukraine ambassador in London. Opinion polls in Ukraine consistently put him in second place after Zelensky, or even ahead of Zelensky if presidential elections were to be held now, which they won't be. Valery Zaluzhny sometimes is ahead of Zelensky. There's also Petro Poroshenko, the former Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky predecessor, who has been sanctioned by Volodymyr Zelensky. So there's that going on. But there is, by and large, an understanding that we've got our president, he's helping us fight, we've got to support him.
There is this mention, though, from Beth Ann specifically of this 3-year feud between someone who is called Andrei Yermak and, of course, the spy chief that we all know, General Budanov. Can you enlighten us on that, James?
Well, Lucy, you're going to be surprised that this centres on an alpha male, shall we say. I mean, Andrei Yermak is this towering guy. He is a lifelong friend of Zelensky. He was a producer, a TV producer in Zelensky's production company in Kryvyi Rih. He is his chief of staff, and his critics say he has only grown in power and influence to a disproportionate level over those past 3 years. It is argued that he has been looking to promote his protégés over the incumbents within Zelensky's cabinet and higher end of the military. So he wants Kirill Budanov, this charismatic head of the security service in Ukraine. He has repeatedly, according to reports, tried to oust him in favour of his own allies, but clearly Zelensky has been able to retain some control in that sense. But we've also seen a deputy prime minister accused of corruption recently. And again, Andrei Yermak has been trying to put in someone of his choosing. So in Ukraine, people like to talk about Yermak because they wonder just how much influence he holds. He has the most face time with the president. And when I've sat in briefings with him, he sits there, legs wide, knuckles out. And he very much talks on his terms.
And when it comes to Budanov, I've also seen reports that say the White House has intervened and says, look, we don't want him fired, we want him to remain in place. Is there truth in that, do you think? I mean, how much could Washington be involved with internal politics in Ukraine?
Well, it's well reported that actually Andrei Yermak has been annoying the Americans whilst representing Ukraine in Washington. And so I think, given that if if Yermak is annoying the Americans, it makes sense for the Americans to say, keep Budanov in place because Yermak wants him gone. So there's been a little bit of disharmony, shall we say.
You know, we've got these massive drone attacks every night. You know, the war is going on and causing so much damage and deaths. Are people really concerned about all of this infighting?
Well, like I say, it doesn't seem to get in the way of fighting Russia, just as yet. But one post on Facebook from a fairly prominent commentator I saw, he said, once this is over, I'm going to smash Zelensky's face in. I hate him so much, but once this is over. So there's a feeling of, you know, we may not like him, but it's all we got at the moment. We got to stick with him for now.
So that overwhelming sense of unity is still there.
This is still existential. The moment you start to fuel the infighting and you hold an election or, you know, Zelensky is toppled, it plays into Russia's, not just its plans, but its continued rhetoric that Zelensky is not a legitimate leader. This repeated baseless claim to lend weight to its own invasion.
It's very rare for us to get through an episode and not talk about drones. And downstairs in the newsroom, we talk about them all day as well. We have this final question from Adam here in London, who says, "Hi everyone, we hear about Ukraine's homemade drone production, but is there any information on homegrown defences, be it small missiles to shoot down drones or anything else?" So not exactly about drones, but about the other things that are going on, Vitaly.
Well, we've spoken about Kirill Budanov, the head of Ukraine's military intelligence. He says about 40% of weaponry used by the Ukrainian armed forces are domestically produced. And it can be anything. The missiles that sank the Russian Black Sea Fleet's flagship, the Moskva, in 2022, were Ukrainian-made. The Neptunes. Well, the list goes on. Various artillery shells as well. Bogdana, the artillery system, very effective. Stuhna, mobile artillery systems, they're very effective. There's a tank factory in Kharkiv which produces armored personnel carriers and repairs tanks. So Ukraine, fortunately for Ukraine, has what's left of the Soviet defense industry, which they've been trying to use in this war. So a lot is being made there, not just drones.
And just as Vitaly says, I mean, the way Ukraine has tried to become self-sufficient in that regard is extraordinary. And European and Western allies are paying a lot of attention now to how Kyiv is doing it. But Zelensky admitted just last week, when it comes to air defences, those Patriot systems we talk about, they still need America to kind of to stay as safe as possible when it comes to the barrage of missiles they're having to endure.
Yeah, that is a very important reminder. But you've been to some of these factories and places where they're building these weapons, James. What are they like?
They're amazingly unremarkable because you walk into a building and you have families mucking in, fixing, applying explosives to deadly FPV drones. It's well ordered, and then we've equally seen soldiers using them on the front lines. It's as secretive as you can imagine. They've proudly shown off these marine drones they launch as well that lie dormant in the Black Sea before being activated to
Magura.
The Magura. So it's now routine for Ukraine, and it knows it's having to stand up for itself.
James, Vitaly, thank you so much. And thank you so much for watching. We'll be back with another Q&A episode next week. And if you like the sound of what you've been hearing, just search for Ukrainecast as well, wherever you get your BBC podcasts. Make sure you also click and subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Ukrainecast from BBC News.